Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We had a few friends at school, but they never let us forget we were haoles. Our South American blood earned us exactly zero clout among the locals. It was the white half that mattered. There were a couple other kids who got picked on as much as we did, and the smart move would have been to team up with them for strength in numbers, but we hated them most of all. If we had to live at the bottom of the social ladder, at least we could try to push them down one rung below us. When the bell rang at the end of the day, there was a 15-minute window before we got on the school bus, and a swarm of kids from kindergarten to 5th grade raced up the hill to cluster in a ring of trees just off the road. It was in this arena the disputes of the day were settled. Trivial rivalries, a misinterpreted sideways glance, an exchange of insults at recess. The reason didn't matter. These brown-skinned native kids in t-shirts and flip-flops were warriors in a colonized land. There may have been an American flag waving over the schoolhouse, but in that grove for those few minutes, it was a tribal feud, a chest-thumping show of machismo where us skinny kids from the mainland had to prove that we deserved to suck air on the most beautiful place on earth. Of course, anthropology didn't cross my mind at the time. I just wanted to see some kid get punched in the stomach. I had it easier than my brother. I took on the dark complexion of my Chilean father, whereas my brother got the light skin and platinum hair my mom's Norwegian blood had to offer. As a first grader, I was only expected to cheer for my pick in the ring, and I wish I could say I was a bold, trash-talking hype man for my brother, but mostly I was just afraid for him. And those afternoons laid the foundation for a lifetime of pleading with him to not dangle over cliffs or walk on the edge of city rooftops. I was lucky I didn't have to fight, because fisticuffs were never part of my instinctual bag of tricks. My patented strategy of windmilling my arms and weeping openly seemed to inspire less fear in the hearts of my opponents than I had hoped. I had to prove myself on the battlefield only once, and as my mom's Jimmy Cliff records had been telling me for years, the harder they come, the harder they fall. Every day on the school bus, there was this wall of a Hawaiian kid from the 3rd grade who had been held back a year. I don't remember his name, but I'm sure it was something medieval and terrifying. His favorite hobby was taking turns picking on any kid smaller than him, and measured against my scrawny frame, he was a Goliath of biblical proportions. So my turn came soon enough. One day, after weeks of ear-tweaking, insults, and threats, my thermostat burst and bubbled me up out of my seat. Before I knew it, I was standing on the moving bus as it snaked down the crumbling coastal road. Sheer cliffs stabbing into the ocean on one side and hard rock of a mountain on the other. And there he stood before me in the aisle, a slack-jawed monster, arms crossed, grinning with crooked yellow teeth. He taunted me in pidgin, with challenges ranging from my validity as a citizen of Hawaii to my validity as anything other than a stupid little white boy. And at this point, my memory slows down and takes on a more cinematic tension than it probably deserves. But as one of only a handful of fistfights in a childhood spent hiding in the bushes, it felt downright Oscar-worthy. Squinting eyes in a stark close-up. Ennio Morricone's Ecstasy of Gold blaring at full blast. Fingers twitching at the sides of my shorts, ready to pull either a pencil eraser or a corduroy lint, those being the sole contents of my pocket. The other children on the bus chanting for blood, a helicopter shot of a yellow school bus in flames, careening wildly and out of control, hugging the side of the cliff, screeching tires narrowly avoiding a fiery end on the rocks below. In reality, I'm sure I was sobbing uncontrollably and sputtering the F word. But as I puffed up on my bony chest in front of this drooling titan, he did what people with the upper hand usually do. He pushed me with that upper hand, and I fell like a rag doll a few rows back. Lacking any actual technique, a wiser kid would have stayed in the fetal position until he'd reached his final destination. But I decided the best strategy was to abandon all strategy and let blind rage take the reins. Next thing I knew, I was up off the ground with my hands on the seat backs on either side of the aisle. He looked down at me with a snaggle-tooth grin, and as I lifted myself up on toothpick arms and swung my legs towards his face with the full force of my 60-pound vegetarian body. Unprepared for any real resistance, he stood there stock still as my feet clacked against his jaw. It sounded like a window slamming shut, and for a second, Everything stopped. The jeers from the other students, the rumble of the tires on the road, the wind in the palm trees. The whole world paused and held its breath. His face didn't show pain or anger. Instead, it twisted into something like curiosity. He took a step back, then another, and seemed to bob for a moment like a cork in the water. The world switched back on as he succumbed to gravity at last and fell hard on his ass. There was no blood, no permanent damage, but there was something longer lasting. As the kids on the bus snapped out of their stasis and cheered, a swell of pride hit my chest, and I almost started crying again, but for different reasons. I found my way back to my seat where my brother clapped me on the back, grinning ear to ear. The boy got up, he sat down in his seat and said nothing. When he got off the bus a few stops later, he scowled at me with dark venom, but his fangs were gone. He never messed with me again, and the bus seemed a more peaceful place after that. I would like to think I gained his respect as a worthy adversary, and later in life he thought twice about picking on the little guy. But I doubt it. It was just one lucky hit in 100. Still, when I think about that day, I can't remember a time when I felt so brave. A field of possibilities stretched out before me in that moment. Adrenaline shook the tall grasses, peeling open reluctant flowers and carrying in springtime noises. It was a place of no consequences, where a moment of caution would be like capturing a butterfly to admire its wings and forgetting to poke holes in the jar. As my brother jabbed me in the ribs with his elbow, heralding my triumph over the ogre who had terrorized this bus for so long, I felt a mountain grow in that field, green and lush with dragons circling its peak and me at the summit. Not a small and meek 8-year-old, but a knight clad in armor with a sword thrust through the clouds, throwing thunderbolts down into the valley of fear. The years have chipped away at the stones of that mountain, taken the wild from the flowers, replacing them with weeds that strip the clay of its power to grow things. And maybe that's what growing up is. Collecting fragile specimens of wonder, trapping them to keep them safe, and forgetting them on the shelf. Ladies and gentlemen, Annaka.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Key West Literary Seminar, for having me. I am going to read 3 poems for y'all. And this first one is called Poem Beginning and Ending with a Fur-Bearing Trout. Sewn together by enterprising taxidermists, the fish was a staple of the 18th century curio cabinet. Those who asked would be told versions of the same tale. The folklore goes that animals born into the frigid waters of the Great Lakes will do anything to fight the cold's numb. As a teenager, I would fill my bathtub with water as cold as our pipes could produce, submerging every limb and patch of skin. I stayed that way for at least an hour, folded into myself. To distract my nerves from their inability to feel, I would invent games. The numbers game is easy. Say aloud the first thing that comes to mind for every numbered second in a minute. 60, the calories in 1 cup of grapes if you peel the skin off. 59, how old I think the man in the pharmacy is when he stared at my chest. I was 12, breasts still new, adjusting to the itch of my gray training bra. The food game is similar. Pick a letter and go from there, naming the foods that feel safe. Asparagus tips, broccoli, cauliflower, Diet Coke and calorie-free sweetener over ice in a tall glass. $58 for new jeans when my favorites became too tight. $57, the grade I get on a math test after eating 2 tablespoons of tuna and a stick of celery over 7 hours. 56, how many crunches I can do if I'm trying my hardest. Everything bagel seasoning sprinkled into my palm. French onion soup with the bread removed and cheese peeled off. 55, the number of the basketball jersey for the biggest player. At my smallest, I am number 11. The low 50s and 40s are tough, but things pick up again in the 30s. 32, the age Karen Carpenter reaches before her death. 31, the age my mother is when she marries in a dress she tells me she is sad I will never fit into. 30 consecutive days I bleed before my periods stop for 6 years. Pickles with the brine dried off, quinoa with lemon juice, radishes sliced thin enough that they are no longer bitter. 15, the number of pounds my mother tells me I should lose before wearing a bikini again. 14, the year I begin to set an alarm for 3 a.m. so I can exercise 3 times per day. Watermelon with salt, X-Lax, 3 therapy sessions in which I'm forced to draw my body, feel my arms sweeping wider than the legal pad can handle, paper body ballooning past the border, spilling into the air. 2 teachers who noticed and keep quiet after my half-hearted explanations, yolks, no more than 1 per day, zebra cakes, chewed and spat into the trash, covered with a layer of crumpled paper towels, 1 year spent attempting to live on 300 calories per day. The fur-bearing trout, despite being a creation of money-hungry animal stuffers, is a creature of genuine spirit, an animal defying all that is natural in its search for some sort of relief. And that poem is basically a wonderful illustration of the fact if you don't want your family to read a poem, you publish it in print, and they will not pay the $18 to buy the issue in which it's published. This next poem is called A Curious Thing. A man slipped a hand inside my body until I shook, but would not touch me otherwise. I walked around the block for a pregnancy test and was disappointed with the negative. When Andre offered me a frog's leg at dinner, I did not think of its wet eyes or the egg from which it swam. I drank too much and bought a purse shaped like a fish. Years ago, I mailed a photo of my breasts across the Atlantic. Twice, I have slept with someone the night before a parent's funeral. A man put his hands around my throat, and I was not frightened. A woman raised her voice, and I cowered in bed. I ate on less than 5 hours a day inside my expensive apartment. I prayed for some miracle to take me out of the city, and then cried the whole way home. I read that poem to a dear friend, and he said, there are some things we can keep to ourselves, as if I hadn't considered it. This last poem is called List Poem, in which there is at least 1 lie. But before I begin, I just wanted to say thank you for having me here, and especially thank you to Katrin, who puts every other coordinator of any other thing to shame. This is List Poem, in which there is at least 1 lie. I've been trying for months to work the word moxibustion into a poem that isn't about sex. According to personality tests, I exhibit higher than average levels of aggression and do not dispute these findings. The first time I saw my father slice the head off a bluegill, I stared into the eye closest to me until the jaw stopped moving. My therapist says I carry the traumas of both my parents, but cannot point me towards a sensible place to drop them. There are people I love only because I have to. I swing between empathy and apathy like an aerialist who's been training for years. When I was a child, I developed crushes on villains and still do not know what that means. Astrological sources blame my birth date for such shortcomings. Whenever I'm alone in a forest, I cannot shake the feeling that I'm being watched and can convince myself of a mountain lion's presence in less than 5 minutes. I drive poorly, but can handle myself in the snow. I throw threats around like an up-and-coming boxer in the 1930s. I rarely feel like I'm winning, but I made it all up to this point. I made it all up. Thank you. And now Brenton will close us out.
So as this mic is getting adjusted, I came here from Los Angeles and just hold space for all those who are suffering right now. A bit of context on my novel, Psalms of Our Blood. As we all know, in the 1940s, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And what a lot of people don't know is that the uranium from those bombs came from a mine in Congo that had uranium that was 1,000 times richer than any other place on planet Earth. and it became so valuable to the US that they erased the entire area off the map. And there was a woman who went from being an outcast to being the most successful and dangerous political strategist of that era, the entire African continent, who was working to reveal this American secret. And my book is about her. This is the beginning, to quote Nana. Half. Blood. The legacy that bound me. On the night I was born in August 1930, blood came as a song. It rippled through Mama's womb and out into the jungles of southeast Congo, where rotting tondolos snapped from their branches and the lake hummed a hemic hymn. The song emanated from a dusty Catholic clinic 5 miles from Maloba village. There, in the repurposed mission house, Mama thrashed in labor. My father paced in the corner, his eyes fixed on his crimson child bride. Her stained pagne reminded him of the morning after he had claimed her womanhood, when the elders had lifted the splotched white cloth and ululated to the village. He watched 3 nuns fretting over the birthing table. Mother Colère, a Belgian woman with hooded eyes, wiped Mama's brow, whispered, "How small she is, how frail." She turned to the sisters. Placental abruption, maybe? 3 holy soprano voices creaked their theories. Of the women, Mother Colère had the most medical experience and the least tolerance for children. Now she had to help one little girl birth another. With no doctor at the clinic, the sisters massaged Mama's uterus, gave her an oxytocic, and prayed. Mama was a beautiful girl of 14, little Josephine, Maloba's most gifted dancer, shining jewel of southeast Congo, sprightly and headstrong with volcanic energy like Nyiragongo. On the night she had met my father, she mesmerized him, stomping her feet under a sliver of moon, huffing her hot breath into the misty air, the umber dust pluming around her ankles, the white pearl shimmering in her woven braids. "We speak to the earth through our feet," she'd say. And she was the best linguist of them all, able to converse even with our earth goddess, Bokumu. Yet here Mama was, on a sterile bed yellowing from overuse, feverish and half-conscious. Mother Colère drilled her gaze into the young girl. If you want to live, if you yourself want to avoid heaven's gates, push like you've never pushed before. Mama screeched. The metallic tang of iron stained the air, and a chorus of nightjars shrieked in a verse we all know. Good Lord, deliver us. And so it was. The Great Spirit Tatanzambe delivered me into the hands of Mother Colère. Hands that clawed me like I was something tainted. Hands that tried to wrap me like an old spool of yarn, haphazard yet clinical. Hands that I interrupted with a gift of infant excrement, causing the dear mother to squeal. It was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. After my delivery, Mama lost consciousness, lost enough blood to fill the antechamber collection plates until they ranneth over. But she didn't lose her life. She held on to that life like a wild dog sinking its fangs into its only meal after a famine. And she would pass that stubbornness on to me. The will to survive in a world that never gives you half a chance. Mother Colère called my father over, a stumpy 41-year-old Frenchman whose bronze skin glinted from a long seafaring lineage, and who, even then, was covered in a strange black dust like he had emerged from under the devil's toenails, and not much more handsome. But to the village, my father's wallet was an Adonis. Many years would pass before I knew what it all meant. Though taking a young bride was nothing new in Maloba, my father was the first Osungu to come, a powerful man who could make or break dreams, a white man. He impressed Maloba with his caravan of trucks gouging the land, and how classically African to believe a white man is dangerous and still fall prey to his charms. Mother Colère looked past the remnants of earth clinging to my father. She scrutinized the bulbous nose expelling forceful air, the creases in the well-worn brow. There was nothing a Catholic nun could spot more easily than the residue of guilt. A man who never expected to be a father. A girl, healthy, and her mother will live just so. She didn't ask him to hold his new daughter, skin the color of virgin wood, lips full, eyes dark. He couldn't bring himself to hold my body, my gaze. The dear mother simply told him of a new Catholic orphanage that was opening at the southern tip of our Katanga province, exclusively for Métis girls, near Elizabethville. I will oversee it myself. Métis, a word that tastes bitter on the tongue. I belong to neither race that made me. And near Mama's still body, Mother Colère offered my father a chance to free himself. Because men do not like when their choices follow them, especially when those choices have legs. My father closed his eyes, nodded, rejected me mere minutes into my earthly existence. That had to be a record. This was the century of progress, after all. European men swarmed to African land like bullet ants on fresh carrion, and they feasted on our women with equal enthusiasm. Polite society expected them to eventually send for their European wives, produce European children, erase any transgressions. Exiling Métis children was a penance for the lust of our fathers. We were the sons and daughters of tainted blood, sins to be knotted off. Of course, none of us asked for the sins of our fathers, and yet our fathers came. Near the thatched mud huts, Mama danced with my body strapped to her chest, shielded me from the illnesses spreading in Maloba. Her wild, toothy cackle drowned out the rumors of a place devouring our men, of a world on the brink of war. But she couldn't shield me from society's judgments, half-breed, half-French, half-African, nothing worth a sum total of love. That's why the villagers told her not to name me, to spare herself the heartache. Because his blood ran through me, the Osungu who would make and break me. But Mama knew an even greater truth, that a name is a spell, a conjuring. When I was 3 days old, she took me under Maloba's protective canopy, looked out toward the water. Like me, Maloba was of two worlds. It extended to Lake Tanganyika, a bridge between Belgian Congo and Tanzania. Villagers from both lands lived here in harmony, found themselves whole. This was the genesis of my story, a story that took me from the glades of Maloba to the walls of the convent, from the place that didn't exist to the center of the world stage. Even now, I can still feel the echo of that journey, the sands of time in my fingers. By naming me, Mama gave me something to return to, and I wanted to return. But before I could, I would need to liberate my nation and myself. It all started the moment Maloba's fearless daughter laid me in a cradle of vines. She pricked her fingertip, dipped it in the sand, and rubbed it on my forehead. She gave me her love. She gave me her protection. She gave me the gift of my own existence. I am the daughter of little Josephine, the granddaughter of Chief Zomage of the painted face. I am Yase.